Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Chris Roach. I represent UK trade and investment at the British Consulate General in Chicago. I cover the sectors of energy, environment, and infrastructure. So that is everything from oil and gas to renewables, water, and also waste. So today I'm going to be talking about the waste management industry in the USA. I'm going to give quite a broad general overview of the waste industry in the USA in this presentation, just because I'm not sure of the types of businesses that you work for in the audience. If you would like, after this presentation, to have a sit-down and a one-to-one meeting with me at the end of this, we can discuss more the specifics of your business and routes to market for you in the USA. Just an overview of UKTI in the US. Obviously, it's a huge market. You've got 4 time zones just in mainland USA, not including Alaska and Hawaii, and we have 9 offices, UKTI offices in the US. Obviously, I'm based at the office in the consulate in Chicago, and we cover that rather large region there in turquoise color. So it's everywhere up from North Dakota all the way down to New Mexico, as far west as Colorado, and as far east as Ohio. We also have consulates in Boston, which covers the New England region. The UKTI's headquarters in North America is in New York City. They also cover Pennsylvania and New Jersey. We've got a small team at the embassy in Washington, D.C., and 2 smaller consulates also in Atlanta and Miami, which cover the southeast region of the U.S., so the Carolinas, Florida, and Georgia. Quite a large team at the consulate in Houston. Obviously, their focus is a lot on oil and gas. There's a big industry down there, and they cover the Gulf states, Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Mississippi. A team in Los Angeles, focused very much on clean technology, water and wastewater and things like that. They cover the southern half of California and the states around there. And then we also have a team up in San Francisco, which cover everything northern part of California and the Pacific Northwest. So just an overview of the waste industry in the US. The Americans, they admit they have what they call a huge trash problem there in America. So they have 5% of the world's population, but they actually produce 40% of the world's waste, which is huge when you think about it. So they generate more waste than any other nation in the world. And per person at the moment, they generate around 4.5 pounds of waste, which is up quite considerably from the last, say, 30 years. There's a figure there, it was about 3.5 in 1980, 3.5 pounds per person per day. That figure at the bottom there is from 2013, where they produced 389 million tons of waste in the States alone. So where does all that waste go? You'll see the pie chart there, which sort of gives you an idea of where it's going. The majority of the waste produced in the US does go to landfill, so 63% of all the municipal solid waste in the States ends up going to landfill at the moment. 23% is recycled, so that's just below 90 million tons of waste which is recycled in the US last year. And then a small amount which is composted, and a small amount which goes to waste to energy facilities as a feedstock to produce energy. Some of the policies that are in place at the moment in the US, it's quite a complicated situation in that the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, they oversee a large variety of waste issues in the US. So that's everything from regulation on hazardous materials, landfill regulations, and some of the recycling goals. But the more specific regulations in the US generally get passed to the states and the cities. And so you'll see different regulations as you go from various state to state and from city to city. The two main regulations that fall to the states, the categories would be landfill bans and also recycling goals. So there are some states that have landfill bans on recyclable materials. These would include Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan, and North Carolina. So generally those states that have a good track record with clean technologies and very much environmentally aware tend to have bans on landfilling recyclables, whereas the states in Texas and some of the southern states will not. Other states focus on recycling goals, and those include California and Illinois, which is the state that I live in Chicago. Chicago is located in Illinois. An example of a policy in the US, which you may or may not be familiar with, is what they call the bottle bill. So if you've ever gone to America and you've bought a can of soda or a bottle of beer, you'll notice this image that you see in the bottom right-hand corner there, which lists all the different states and the deposit that you're putting on. When you're buying a bottle or a can, you're basically paying a deposit on top of the fee of the drink. So in those states, in Maine, Vermont, Connecticut, Massachusetts, New York, Oregon, and Iowa, that's a 5-cent deposit that you're putting on. And in Michigan, it's 10 cents. So it's basically up to the consumer to collect those bottles and those cans and return them and receive a payback on the deposit that they paid originally on the bottle. And you can see the map there. The states that are highlighted are the states that currently have a bottle bill in effect. And the graph here shows the percentage of redemption rates in the US for beverage containers that are recycled. So the national average is this black line here at the bottom, which sort of waves around about 40%. And the states that actually have a bottle bill in place, you can see a much higher percentage of them are being recycled, as you would expect, given that there's a financial incentive for consumers to recycle. Interestingly, Michigan, the state there that has the 10-cent deposit, they're sort of between 95 and 100% recyclable rate of their beverage bottles and cans. In terms of the landfill policy in the US at the moment, they do have laws and regulations regarding the operation of landfills, but there's no national flat landfill tax or fee. That decision is passed on to the states and local government cities to collect those fees and taxes. The average landfill, what they call a tipping fee, which is landfill tax in the US, is just under $50 per ton of waste. But this, of course, varies by the state and also by the county. So you'll find in the states in the northeast, in New England, and also on the west coast, the fee will be much higher than the states in the south and larger states. So, for example, there in Utah, which is quite a rural state in the central region of the states, the fee is under $25 per ton of waste, whereas in Maine, which is up in New England, where they want to preserve a lot of the natural environment there, it is over $90 per ton, the tipping fee there. Certain items also will be banned in certain states. For example, car tires are banned from going to landfill in certain states, whereas others will accept them, like Texas. They'll accept car tires. In terms of routes to market in the US, it's obviously a huge industry. We mentioned the amount of waste that is produced in the US. It's a $52 billion a year industry, which is obviously huge. Is quite difficult to penetrate. The two routes to market would be either through the publicly owned and city-owned landfills, and they'll put out requests for proposals. So they'll have contracts that they'll put out for 10-year, and it'll be up to private sector companies to bid on those contracts in order to win them. That is one way of going to market, but there is certainly a local preference in the US, so they do prefer to hire local firms and firms that have a presence in the US on the ground. Another potential route to market would be to partner with the large companies and the operators in the US at the moment. And some of those companies are listed on this slide. You'll see Waste Management there in the bottom left. They are the biggest player in the US market at the moment. They're headquartered out of Houston in Texas. These two companies here, Allied Waste and Republic Services, they were number one and number two. Recently, Republic Services actually purchased Allied Waste, and they kept the Republic name, so they're number two, the second player in the waste management market. And a few of the others there, Progressive are a Canadian HQ'd company. They are the third largest waste company operating in North America. And Clean Harbors are a company out of Massachusetts. They deal more in hazardous waste, Clean Harbors do. You'll be familiar with Veolia, the French company. 14% of their environment sector, 14% of their business is done in North America, so they have quite a large portion of their business out of North America. And the other two on there are Waste Connections, which is a company out of the Woodlands in Texas, which is just north of Houston, and Advanced Disposal, which is a company out of Florida, which covers 17 states in that southern eastern part of the US. Moving on now, I'm looking at the industry of waste to energy in the US. There's an infographic there on the right, which was spun out of a study which was done by Columbia University in the US. Just looking at the opportunity for the waste to energy market in the US, given that they produce so much waste, which is at the moment being sent to landfill, but this is a great feedstock to generate electricity and transportation fuels in the US. And they have recognized that there's enough solid waste sent to landfills at the moment in the US to power almost 14 million homes, which would be 12% of US homes at the moment. And there's also enough non-recycled plastics that could then be converted into oil to power 9 million cars. They have quite a large industry in the US for biofuels, so using corn as a feedstock, which they blend then into gasoline. But I've noticed there's a lot of companies at the moment in the US which are getting into this market of using those non-recycled plastics to produce an oil, which is also then blended into the gasoline for transportation fuels. And obviously, America is a large country. There is a lot of open space, but the areas that are producing the waste, obviously, there's a huge population there, and they're very conscious that they're trying to save the amount of open space that they're using at the moment for landfill because they're producing so much. So if they were to use more of their waste to produce fuels and electricity, then this study says that they'd save 6,000 acres of open space each year. And obviously, at the moment, with the amount that they're landfilling, it's not sustainable. So in terms of energy recovery, at the moment there are 86 waste-to-energy plants in the US. They're located in the states that you see highlighted in blue. And as you'd expect, they are located in the areas of the high population where a lot of waste is produced and there's also a lot of electricity demand. Interestingly, there have been no new waste-to-energy plants built since 1995, which is quite a surprise. But yeah, that's the waste-to-energy market currently in the US. A little bit of information on sort of generic US and UK trade. So the US at the moment is the number one destination for all UK exports. It's the biggest economy in the world, and they buy the most stuff from us Brits, and we do the most business with them than any other market. And you'll see that in 2013, their gross domestic product was just over $16 trillion, which represents a quarter of the global gross domestic product. And the economy in the US at the moment is really booming. Since the evolution of fracking and using shale gas, the price of gas has really come down, which has sort of given rise to a boom of manufacturing in the US. So we're seeing a lot of manufacturing, a lot of industry. A lot of manufacturing is coming back over from China now, and it's much more competitive in the US. So the economy is really doing quite well. At the moment, they're in negotiations for a transatlantic trade agreement called TTIP, which the idea there is to make exporting goods over to the US and services much more easy to cut out some of the regulations. So potentially, we could be doing even more business with the US in the future. Some tips on doing business in the US market. We always mention to companies that are looking at the US not to treat it as a single market as you perhaps would the Republic of Ireland, but to treat it more like the whole European Union, because each region within the US has a different business culture. How you would approach the market in, say, for example, New York City would be very different to how you would approach the market in a state like Texas. So it's important that you do your research, see how your market is in each of the different regions in the US, and target a market which would be most appropriate for your business. A lot of companies look at the East Coast as their landing point in the US because they say it's easiest to get to, it's the closest, and they've heard of New York City, or they look at LA, they look at the two coasts, and they ignore that whole central region of the US. They see that as flyover territory. But obviously, being based in Chicago, we tell them there's huge opportunity there in the Great Lakes region, and they certainly shouldn't ignore those states that they perhaps might not have thought of first. Having presented all the impressive figures on the last slide about the size of the economy, the buying power of the US, a lot of companies think that it's potentially a low-hanging fruit, an easy market to crack. There's also similarities in the language and business culture, but it's really not the case in the US. It is a very difficult market. There's a lot of competition. There's a lot of local competition from US businesses, and also there's a lot of foreign competition that's also chasing for those American dollars. So it does take a lot of time and effort. You really do have to visit the market often. You have to build relationships. And we find that having a local presence, whether it's through a partnership or through a sales office or an office that you've set up yourself on the ground in the US, that is generally the best way to go. You have to have a lot of face time in the US in order for vendors to trust you and for business partners to trust you. A few other tips, but the trade shows, obviously well attended in the US. This is a great trade show, but you'll find that when you go to the US market, a lot of trade shows is where a lot of business gets done. So we do recommend that you take advantage of any future trade missions, either hosted by UK Trade and Investment or individual trade missions that you might attend on your own. Take advantage of those, try and do a lot of preparation, set up some meetings in advance so that you can maximize your time. And in terms of next steps, if you're interested in the US market, I would encourage you to reach out to your local ITAs in the region, and also to, if you're interested in the US market, to let myself know. We have a lot of offices obviously dotted around the country, and I can pass you off to relevant offices if you're interested in a certain area of the US.